no one alive.
Thragg wasn't born in the way people are. There was no chance involved, no moment where two lives came together and hoped for the best. He was decided. The Viltrumites didn't believe in luck. Everything about them was controlled, from their wars to their expansion and even down to their blood. So when they wanted the perfect leader, they didn't wait for one to appear. They built him. Generation after generation, the strongest were paired with the strongest, over and over again until eventually the result stood in front of them, Thragg. And from the moment he could stand, his life wasn't his. He wasn't raised, he was shaped. Every fight was a test, every opponent was a benchmark. Losing wasn't just failure, it was something that wasn't supposed to happen, and the truth is, it rarely did. Because he kept winning, and kept rising. By the time he was fully grown, there wasn't a Viltrumite alive who could match him one-on-one. His power level was off the charts even by Viltrumite standards, and that's saying something, because Viltrumites are already operating at a level most species can't even conceptualize. He kept becoming something the rest of his species couldn't quite reach, so he wasn't just stronger, he was literally beyond them. So when Emperor Argal died, there was no need for chaos or power struggle. Everyone was in sync. There was a unison of understanding. Thragg stepped forward and became the Grand Regent, the one who would hold the Empire together, and for all practical purposes, he became the most powerful being alive. But before Argal died, he gave Thragg something. And no, it wasn't a secret weapon or some mysterious army somewhere. He left him with a responsibility. That responsibility was his skull. Argal handed Thragg his skull and with it gave him a command: find the true heir to the Viltrumite throne. Because the royal bloodline hadn't ended, it was still out there, hidden and scattered somewhere across the universe. Thragg wasn't meant to rule forever. As the Grand Regent, he was to find the skull's owner and hand power over to whoever it was. He was meant to keep the Empire intact until the rightful ruler returned. That was the agreement, and Thragg accepted it. He carried that skull for thousands of years, and through all those years he led, ruled, and protected everything the Viltrumites had built. On the surface, he did everything right. But in all honesty, the truth was that he never intended to give it back. The lie he lived for millennia. For thousands of years, Thragg searched. At least that's what everyone believed. But he wasn't searching to protect the heir. He was searching to make sure no one else ever found them. He wanted to eliminate the threat before it became real. The throne and the Empire was his, because somewhere along the way the role stopped being temporary. It became his identity. The Empire wasn't just something he ruled, it was what he was. Every decision, every war, every life that lived or died, it all passed through him. And after carrying that weight for that long, the idea of handing it over to someone who hadn't fought for it, let alone earned it, he couldn't accept that. So he did what people like him always do. He justified it. Told himself the Empire needed him, that he was the strongest, the most capable, that giving power away would be a mistake the Empire couldn't survive. And just like that, the mission changed. The heir wasn't something to protect anymore, it was something to eliminate. And for a long time, it worked. No one questioned him, no one even knew. Up until Nolan Grayson showed up on Earth. Nolan, Omni-Man, was already a complicated figure in the Viltrumite story. He'd been sent to Earth to conquer it slowly, to prepare it for absorption into the Empire. That was the mission, but somewhere along the way he actually built a life there. He fell in love and got married to a human woman, and together they had a son. And that son, Mark Grayson, invincible, turned out to carry Viltrumite genes strong enough to give him full powers. What Thragg eventually uncovered was that it wasn't just their powers that were significant. It was their blood. Nolan and Mark were direct descendants of Emperor Argal. The bloodline he'd been sitting on for thousands of years pretending to search for had been right there the whole time. This changed everything. Thragg's entire operation shifted. It was no longer about managing the Empire or expanding Viltrumite reach. His mission narrowed to making sure neither Nolan nor Mark ever sat on that throne. He couldn't just execute them openly. That would raise questions. There would need to be a reason, a justification the Empire would accept. So he maneuvered. He plotted and worked quietly, the way someone does when they know they're doing something they can't defend out loud. For a while it worked. He kept them at arm's length, kept the secret buried, and kept the skull hidden. But things were already starting to fall apart somewhere else entirely. When the Empire cracked, the Viltrumites had always been unstoppable. You didn't fight them and win, you survived them, and that's if you were lucky. But the rest of the universe had been learning and trying to adapt. And eventually, they stopped trying to fight fair. The coalition of planets created the Scourge virus. This was not a weapon you dodge, nor something you overpower. It was something that gets inside you and targets what you are. And it worked. The Viltrumite population, already thinned from years of war and internal conflict, collapsed even further. Warriors who had survived centuries were gone. And then came the final blow. The coalition hit Viltrum itself. The planet was destroyed, just like that. The empire that had stretched across galaxies was suddenly bleeding. And Thragg? He didn't panic or break. Well, it's his thing to not break. He simply just adapted, and that's what made him dangerous. He looked at what was left and made a decision. He decided his next move was Earth, and it made sense. The population there was massive and genetically compatible, and thanks to Nolan and Mark, Viltrumite DNA had already taken root there. If the Viltrumite species was going to survive, they needed numbers, and the fastest way to build numbers was to settle somewhere and start producing half-Viltrumite offspring who could eventually be trained into warriors. Earth wasn't just a planet, but a solution. But Thragg miscalculated something fundamental. There was something he didn't understand. The Viltrumites already living on Earth had changed. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They had lives. Some had solid relationships and families. They weren't soldiers waiting for orders. So when Thragg tried to take control and push his Earth strategy forward, the loyalty he expected wasn't there. He ran into resistance instead, and that's when everything started to fall apart. The fall from power. The remaining Viltrumites leaders gathered to deal with Thragg directly. His conduct and the way he had been running things were starting to get suspicious. Thragg stood in front of the people who had followed him for thousands of years. And for the first time, the truth was out. The skull, the Argal bloodline, the heir, everything he had buried was suddenly exposed. And the realization hit them all at once. The man they trusted had been protecting his power, not their future. The sentence wasn't death, it was exile. Thragg was stripped of his title, authority, and empire. Everything he had built his identity around was gone. And for someone like Thragg, that cut deeper than anything else ever could. And yes, he left. But he was far from done. Building an army from nothing. Thragg didn't need an empire to be dangerous, he just needed time and a purpose. He found the Thraxans. They were small species. They couldn't be regarded as anything special, except for something unique they had. They reproduced fast, their children grew even faster. For most, it was just biology, but not for Thragg. He saw it as an opportunity instead. He embedded himself among them and started fathering children, hundreds of them, and like that, he started building. Viltrumite Thraxan hybrids inherited his strength and matured in a fraction of the time. He didn't just create them, he raised them, trained them, and turned them into soldiers, and gave them the same belief that had defined him his entire life. Strength is everything. Weakness doesn't deserve to exist. And the people who cast him aside would answer for it. Battle Beast. Before the final reckoning with Mark, there was one fight. Battle Beast was a warrior who lived for combat. He was someone who searched the universe for something, anything that could push him to his limit. He wasn't looking for victory, he was looking for something real. He was the kind of fighter who genuinely enjoyed nearly dying because it meant he'd found something real. And he found it in Thragg, and what followed was a very brutal fight. These were two beings who had built their entire existence around strength, tearing into each other with nothing held back. It went on longer than it should have. Long enough that, for once, the outcome wasn't certain. But in the end, Battle Beast fell. It wasn't easy, but there had to be a winner. And though he fell, it was not without leaving his mark. But Thragg was still standing. Yes, wounded, but still standing. And that was enough. Inside the sun. The final fight between Thragg and Mark Grayson didn't happen on a battlefield. It didn't happen on a planet. It happened inside the sun. By this point, Mark Grayson wasn't the same person anymore. He had fought his father. He had fought Viltrumites. He had died and come back. He had watched people he loved get destroyed by a conflict that started before he was born. He had become harder, more precise, and carried the kind of weight that either breaks you or makes you something different entirely. And Thragg? Thragg had nothing left but the need to win. He had no empire or title. All he had was just the need to prove that he was still what he had always been, the strongest. So they fought, inside the sun, where the heat alone should have ended everything instantly. And they kept going, blow after blow, neither of them stopping, neither of them backing down. There were moments Mark was losing, moments it looked like Thragg would prove, once again, that he was exactly what he was created to be. But Thragg misunderstood something he never learned. Mark wasn't just Viltrumite, he was human. The human part of him that had watched people he loved suffer and die because of this man and everything he represented, and that had decided that it was time to end all of it. And that's why he didn't stop. That's why he kept going. Until finally Thragg didn't get back up. And like that, inside a sun, the most powerful Viltrumite who had ever lived died, what he was. It's easy to look at Thragg and see a tyrant, a villain who held onto power for too long, who lied, manipulated, destroyed anything that threatened his position. But that's not the whole story. Thragg believed in what he was doing. He believed the Viltrumite way was right, that strength should decide everything, that he was the best option. And maybe, for a long time, he was. But the universe changed, the Empire changed, and Thragg couldn't, because changing would mean admitting that everything he had sacrificed, everything he had built his life around wasn't worth it. So he stayed the same, right to the end, the perfect weapon, still aiming, even when there was nothing left to protect. And in the end, he wasn't defeated by someone stronger. He was defeated by someone who refused to become what he was, and that was something Thragg could never beat.